It's August 21st, and you thought the boring dystopian fever dream of the Trump presidency ended. Well, did you think it ended? Because Mar-a-Lago was recently raided by the FBI for, what was it? Classified documents that didn't exist. No. Classified documents that did exist, but the National Archives could have gotten whenever they wanted if they just asked. No. They were declassified documents because Trump declared them declassified.
I declare bankruptcy!
Not how that works. No, you see, okay, well, so they exist, and they might be classified or declassified. They might be nuclear, who knows? Anyway, Trump wants those documents back because they're his, not the government's. Also, somewhere along the way, Obama. The legacy of Trump's presidency is best understood if you look at it not in terms of his presidency ending or any potential court case that he might face in the near future, but in terms of Trumplandia solidifying before our very eyes. Make no mistake, Donald Trump is not the president, but his legacy is well on its way to a generation of abject moral and logical failings. At least a generation. From terrible climate policy to the ingrained paranoia of the now mainstream alt-right that is essentially the new Republican Party, to the now very real consequence of appointing so many Christian conservatives to the Supreme Court, Trump's absence is merely the absence of a floating, talking orange head on our TVs and smartphones 24/7. But the cat diarrhea of national policy that he left behind is getting smeared all over, and there's no sign that it'll be cleaned up anytime soon. And I, for one, had been struggling to find firm footing in the diarrhea of American conservatism since the January 6th insurrection. What horrifying trend were conservatives embracing that really needed my prolonged attention? It's been like trying to juggle wet noodles. Covering the war in Ukraine at least got me out of the psychosis of American politics. But even then, I really started struggling with the horror stories that were coming out of Ukrainian rape survivors as they fled to Poland. And then we ourselves, the United States of America, joined the ranks of Poland in terms of abortion care. Poland has some of the most restrictive abortion laws in Europe, and they have them because they also succumb to a particularly toxic, venomous form of super-conservative Christianity that permeated their politics even though the majority of Poles support women's rights to have abortions. For more information on the European front, I recommend our previous episode, Abortion Without Borders. But I have an 11-year-old daughter, and the prospect of raising her into adulthood in a now post-Roe country means I have to define or redefine what fatherhood itself looks like. Since I learned I was going to be a father to a girl, it has been important to me to understand how the world works for women, and more specifically, how the world was going to work for my daughter. That is our responsibility as parents, right? To interpret their existence into a given reality. How can they be their best selves where we are, and how can we help them get there? When I say best self, I mean having complete autonomy over their future, having autonomy over their bodies so they can live the lives they want. Men have that. There's no question about that. But there is a conservative mode of thought that removes women from their bodies when it comes to pregnancy. Maybe you've seen the oh-so-quaint takes on Twitter or even the subreddit Not How Girls Work that assert that a fetus is not actually part of a woman's body, or that the uterus is not part of a woman's body. And maybe that has left you, like me, wondering when the asteroid will finally hit. Since the June 24th Roe ruling, news outlets have jumped at the chance to test out the immature logic of the American right by reporting on the exceptions to the abortion rule. And there have been a lot. Consider the 10-year-old rape victim from Ohio who had to travel to Indiana to get an abortion because Ohio wanted her to carry it full term. Or consider Nancy Davis in Louisiana, whose fetus has acrania, meaning it is missing the top of its skull and cannot survive outside the womb. But acrania is not on the list of conditions that would allow for an abortion, forcing Davis to either travel out of state or give birth to a fetus that will die. Or consider the case of a 16-year-old Florida girl whose abortion has been blocked by a judge because she is, quote, not sufficiently mature to have an abortion. Now consider that last one long and good. A 16-year-old girl is not sufficiently mature to decide to have an abortion, but she is sufficiently mature to be responsible for a baby that she knows she doesn't want for the rest of her life. And this is a theme that we'll come back to, the contradictory nature and infantile logic behind prohibiting exceptions to abortion laws, and also just prohibiting abortion in general. Wherever you get your memes, you have undoubtedly come across perfectly concise and completely false anti-abortion propaganda. From lying about anatomy to dubious religious claims, from bad faith interpretations of law to just plain bad opinion presented as philosophical fact, the conservative movement wants you to know that women are not, cannot, and should not be allowed to decide if they want to be pregnant. Well, let's back up. You can decide, of course, if you want to be pregnant by not having sex. And if you choose to have sex, then you have to live with the consequences. This is how children think, and American conservatives exclusively use this kind of immature logic. Except kids aren't that stupid, and that's not actually how children think. American conservatives actually have to try to use less logic than children. For this episode, I got my shit together and interviewed my own daughter to see what overturning Roe means for her and the girls who are now at the mercy of the adults who don't give a shit about them. Welcome to Unfuck the Poor.
Ms. Foster, you think a 10-year-old would choose to carry?
In the 10-year-old case, first of all, the Ohio...
No, my question is, would a 10-year-old choose to carry a baby?
It is a shame that it happens, but there's an opportunity for that woman, no matter how young or old she is, to make a determination about what she's going to do to help that life be a productive human being.
I believe it would probably impact her life, and so therefore it would fall under any exception and would not be an abortion.
It seems to me, first of all, from what I understand from doctors, that's really rare. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down.
Wait, it would not be an abortion if a 10-year-old with her parents made the decision not to have a baby that was the result of a rape?
If you felt something incredibly powerful at Auschwitz and Birkenau over the 11 million killed worldwide and the 1.5 million killed on those grounds, cannot we feel something extraordinary about 55 million murdered in our own country in the wombs of their mothers?
If a 10-year-old became pregnant as a result of rape and it was threatening her life, then that's not an abortion.
Why is it that the women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions? Nobody wants to impregnate you if you look like a thumb.
Ms. Warbelow, are you familiar with disinformation?
Yes, I am.
Did you just hear some disinformation?
Yes, I heard some very significant disinformation.
Why don't you tell me about that?
Yes, an abortion is a procedure. It's a medical procedure that individuals undergo for a wide range of circumstances, including because they have been sexually assaulted, raped in the case of the 10-year-old. It doesn't matter whether or not there is a statutory exemption. It is still a medical procedure that is understood to be an abortion. Beyond that, I think it's also important to note that there is no exception for the life or the health of the mother in the Ohio law. That's why that 10-year-old had to cross state lines in order to receive an abortion.
And I think even when life begins in that horrible situation of rape, that it is something that God intended to happen.
The title of this is from Politico.com. This was actually published today, July 14th, 2022. National Right to Life official, 10-year-old should have had baby. The story has sparked a national conversation over the consequences of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and how ooh boy. Let's try that again.
You can do it.
I can do it.
Yeah, maybe.
This is from Politico.com, published today, July 14th, 2022. National Right to Life official, 10-year-old should have had baby. The 10-year-old Ohio girl crossed state lines to receive an abortion in Indiana should have carried her pregnancy to term and would be required to do so under a model law written for state legislatures considering more restrictive abortion measures, according to the General Counsel for the national right to life. Jim Bopp, an Indiana lawyer who authored the model legislation in advance of the Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe v. Wade, told Politico on Thursday that his law only provides exceptions when the pregnant person's life is in danger. Quote, "She would have had the baby, and as many women who have had babies as a result of rape, we would hope that she would understand the reason and ultimately the benefit of having the child." End quote. This is what Bopp said in a phone interview on Thursday. I'm sorry, this makes me pretty sick. So
why would anyone make a law that's not their choice to make? They clearly haven't had to make that choice. And the woman politics probably haven't had to make that choice either.
So
they at least haven't been educated on it.
But here's the thing, though. The person that wrote that, Jim Bopp, he's an attorney. He's a lawyer. So he's definitely not dumb, right? Like, let's look at, here's what I just pulled up his profile on bopplaw.com. That's BOPPLAW.com, COM. He was admitted to the bar in 1973, U.S. Supreme Court 1977. His he's won the National Law Journal. He's been named one of the 100 most influential lawyers in America 2013. Let's see what else. He's been on the Republican National Committee vice chairman 2006 to 2012. They don't just hand out those chairmanships. He's done all that. Man, look at all this stuff that he's done. Congressional Biomedical Ethics Advisory Committee. Do you think this lawyer knows anything about biomedical ethics?
The reason is money.
The reason is always money. Let's see if we can find anything that says, let's see. Oh my gosh, it gets worse. It gets worse with Jim Bopp. So not only is he...
Oh yeah, I saw about this actually. They're trying to take away LGBTQ plus rights and make it illegal for same-sex marriage.
That's right. So Jim Bopp is let's go. We're on Wikipedia. You can just go to James Bopp Jr. on Wikipedia, and it'll tell you all about him. But here we go right now. So he's the one that authored this legislation in Ohio that says that a 10-year-old girl should have to carry a pregnancy to term, even if she's raped. This same man has repeatedly represented Indiana on the Republican Party's platform committee, including in 2016. Bopp pushed for socially conservative platform, advocating platform language stating that children, quote, deserve a married mom and dad, and referring to, quote, natural marriage as between a man and a woman. So Jim Bopp is actively working against LGBTQ plus folks.
Yes.
Doesn't believe in same-sex marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Probably thinks that drag queens are grooming children.
Pedophiles.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh my God, it even gets worse. In the November 2020 election, President Donald Trump was defeated by Democratic candidate Joe Biden. Trump refused to concede the election and made false claims the election was stolen from him. Bopp supported Trump's false claims. Bopp filed 4 lawsuits challenging the election results in 4 swing states won by Biden: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, and Wisconsin. Bopp's lawsuit, brought on behalf of a handful of voters in each of the 4 states, sought to throw out more than 6.3 million votes across 18 countries and therefore made Trump the winner of all those states and thus the election. 1 week after filing the lawsuits, Bopp abruptly withdrew the suit and he declined to explain why, probably because it was bullshit. He's also been involved in an anti-vaccination lawsuit, campaign finance and election lawsuits. And oh my God. Okay. Well, 14th Amendment lawsuits as well. All right. So, Mr. National Right to Life, Mr. Anti-LGBTQI plus Jim Bopp wrote some model legislation saying that the 10-year-old girl who was raped should have had to carry
a child
to birth. And he also says, let's go back to it. He also said, we would hope that she would understand the reason that she was forced to give birth to this rape child, and ultimately the benefit of having the child. What would be the benefit of a 10-year-old having a child?
I don't know, but in my opinion, every single child deserves 2 parental figures. But those 2 parental figures do not always deserve a child.
Hey, there you go.
If you are 10 years old and having a child, it's not that you don't deserve a child, but you don't deserve a child because you physically can't take care of it.
Oh, but no, hold on. No, hold on. Let's back up. Hold on. Because this actually really hurts my heart to use you as an example. Because I can't, so this is actually the real reason I wanted to have this episode with you is because I literally cannot fathom having to ever make this choice with you, for you. I cannot fathom having this choice be one that our family has to make. And so this idea, and this is very real because this happened. And now they're saying this guy, Jim Bopp, Mr. Anti-LGBTQ, anti-vaccine weirdo, this guy's saying that, if this were you would have to carry that pregnancy through. And not only that, they're saying that me, the parent of you, and your mother, the mother of you, us together as parents, we also don't have a say over our own child.
Yeah.
We don't have
should
that right.
Always have a say first.
The child should always have the say first, except, do you really think that in this instance, what do you think if there was a 10-year-old who, let's just say, is not as mature as you and doesn't really get what's happening, right? And they think, oh, having a baby, maybe that'll be fun. Do you really think a 10-year-old can make that decision?
It depends if they are as mature as I am.
Right.
But if they are not, then a responsible adult that has legal care of this child should make the choice. But if you are not a responsible adult, you should not make the choice.
All right. So, but let's go to that notion of a kid being mature. Who's going to make that decision that the kid is mature enough to decide whether or not to have a baby?
A responsible adult that has legal care of the child.
But let me ask you this. Let's go back. And this might even be where I'm going with it in general. So do you really think 100%, do you think that right now, if you had to choose, do you think that if you wanted to do you think you're mature enough to take care of a child? If you had a baby?
I don't think I do a very good job, according to the fact that I don't like children.
Fair enough.
As a child, right. I do not like children.
So let's think of all the other stuff, too, that goes along with that, right? So, like, you ride your horse.
Yeah.
Did you know you cannot ride a horse if you're pregnant?
Yes.
Did you know that babies cost a lot of money?
Yes.
Did you know that if you were a mother and we suddenly became grandparents, your life would look a lot different?
Yeah, I knew that.
Like, probably the horse thing would probably go out the window because we'd be supporting another baby, right? Mm-hmm. And then I don't even understand. Like, I'm having a hard time even like going through, because this idea of a child having a child is so bizarre. Like, even doing like a mental exercise in imagining it makes no sense to me, right? Like, because it's something that just should not be happening. Like, it is hypothetically reprehensible that somebody thinks that should be a position that anybody is in, personally. Right. Like, I can't even carry out a hypothetical scenario where you actually have a baby, because that is not.
I can't either, because I don't want one.
And it doesn't make, like, that visualization does not make any sense to me.
No.
And I don't think people like Jim Bopp, I don't think they think about it either. Like, I don't think they give a shit. Like, I don't think...
If you're going to make something a law, running through what you are making illegal should be your first thought when you wake up and the last thought before you go to bed.
Right, because, like, so I mean, I don't have a law degree, right? You don't have a law degree.
And you don't have that.
Yeah, it's true. But like, even like just the practical implication, right, of a 10-year-old having a child.
11-year-old.
An 11-year-old having a child. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. In no way on earth as a parent, right? Like, I think I'm pretty, like, open, right? Like, you get to make a lot of decisions, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's one of those things, like, even if you were like, I want to keep this baby, your mom and I would be like, no, that's not happening.
And I would never say that.
Right. But I'm just saying, like, in that instance, like, don't get me wrong, adults always have to have, like, consent of children, right, to do, like, anything, right? You have to respect their I have to respect your person, right?
Yeah.
But, like, in that kind of situation, right, like, the authority that we have as parents, that is one of those, like, absolute things, like, you are our child, and that is not something that we're going to subject you to.
Yeah.
I think the initial trauma of being raped is, I think that's more trauma than any one person should have to experience. And to put a child through that, and then to put giving birth on top of it, and then having to raise a child, none of this makes any sense.
No.
To me it seems cruel and ignorant.
As it is.
Cruel and ignorant. Yeah. So let's keep reading this article. The story of the 10-year-old rape victim forced to leave her home state to terminate a pregnancy has sparked a national conversation over the consequences of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and how far some states are willing to go to prohibit abortions. The Columbus Dispatch reported on Wednesday that a 27-year-old man was charged with rape in connection with the case, while BOP's model legislation, which was released in advance of the Supreme Court's ruling last month, encourages states to ban all abortions unless necessary to save the life of the pregnant person. It notes, quote, "It may be necessary in certain states to have additional exceptions, such as for women pregnant as a result of rape or incest," end quote. Quote, "Unless her life was at danger, there is no exception for rape." Unless her life was at danger, there is no exception for rape, Bopp said. The bill does propose exceptions for rape and incest in my model because that is a pro-life position, but it's not our ideal position. We don't think, as heart-wrenching as those circumstances are, we don't think we should devalue the life of the baby because of the sins of the father.
It's not a baby, it's a few cells to a fetus.
It is currently legal to have an abortion in Indiana up to 22 weeks of pregnancy, though the state legislature is expected to hold a special session later this month to consider legislation that would ban abortion. Republican legislative leaders have not shared details of the bill they plan to introduce, though abortion rights proponents in the state are expecting the bill's text to hew closely to BOP's model legislation. Bopp said he believes it is, quote, Bopp said he believes it is, quote, highly likely Indiana's legislature will pass a law during its special session that will, quote, provide substantial protection to the unborn, end quote. What the exact details of that are, I don't know, Bopp said. That last part right there, what the exact details are of that law that's going to be passed, he doesn't know. That's bullshit. Why? Because he fucking wrote it, right?
Yeah.
You know, so this girl, this 10-year-old girl, there's a reason we don't know her name.
Yes.
Do you know why that is?
Privacy reasons.
Privacy reasons, and also because she is 10 years old.
Yeah.
And, you know, news stories, journalism or journalists, and the news media in general, it is for the protection of minors that we don't share their names or pictures when they are the victims of crime.
Right.
So, this kind of has stuck in my head. So in this instance, we have the social, moral, ethical understanding that we are not going to share this 10-year-old girl's name and picture. But, according to Jim Bopp, this 10-year-old who has the right to privacy, right? We don't know her name or what she looks like.
No.
All
we know is that she's in Ohio and she's 10 years old.
That's
we don't
all
even
we know.
know her pronouns.
We don't even know her pronouns. But something as simple as protecting her privacy, everybody understands that. And yet these politicians and lawyers believe that that girl, who's protected, whose privacy is protected, she should not be protected from forced birth.
Yeah.
So we'll never know her name.
Which is extremely dangerous at a young age, if I might add.
We'll never know her name. We'll never know what she looks like. I mean, she might come out when she's 18 and say, this was me and this was my experience. But, you know,
That's 8 years from now, and we're not, like, asking her for it.
And we're not owed anything, right?
Yeah.
But this idea that, you know, we can respect that, right? We can't pierce that veil, right? Like, we can't violate her privacy in the sense that we can't show her face or name her. But, you know, forcing her to give birth, that's within...
That's okay in some people's minds.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
It's super weird. And I mean,
odd.
So
dumb. Stupid.
So in this world, in this political world, in this conservative world where we are protecting children from drag queens,
which
right?
are awesome.
Which are awesome. In this world in this world we're protecting kids from drag queens because we think they're pedophiles. And in this world where we don't name a 10-year-old rape victim, we're still okay with forcing that child to give birth.
Yeah.
That does not protect the child.
No.
That does not respect her privacy.
It's forcing her to give birth, pretty sure, I'm 90% sure, 99% sure, that girl would rather her name and face be shown than being forced to give birth, because I absolutely would.
That's a powerful thing to say.
Thank you.
I think it's important for you to know that the whole reason that I started this podcast and the whole reason that I think about politics in general is, like, before I was your father, before you were even, like, in our lives, or we thought you would be in our lives, I wasn't really, like, I didn't hold very strong opinions or convictions about anything. I mean, I believed in equal rights and, universal health care, and, I'll say, anti-sexism, anti-racism. I believe in true equality among everybody, but I didn't really have any political leanings, right? And then when we found out we were having a baby, it was like, well, now I'm bringing another human being into this world.
This burning planet.
So how do I maybe help make the planet less burning? And so that's really when I started to think more deeply about politics, and, having, if you want to get into like if you want to get into like a, just a discussion about what is it to have a kid, right? It doesn't really matter if you have a boy or a girl because you raise them, equally and all that. Yes. But there are very real differences between raising a boy and a girl, would you say?
Yeah.
So what do you think? Can you think of anything that maybe a boy might have to go through that a girl doesn't have to go through?
Learning how to aim, which they never do.
Ah, yes, the old aiming while urinating. Aiming is a thing. What about, say, girls? What's something that girls might have to go through that boys don't?
Period. Sexism is a lot more aimed at women.
Well, let's go back to the first thing that you said, which was periods.
Yeah.
So what is a period?
Menstrual cycle.
What is that?
It's also where you bleed out, but you don't die.
Also, I guess we should preface this by saying, how old are you?
I'm 11.
You just turned 11 back in June. Less than a month ago. So
it was just like a few weeks ago, like 3 weeks ago.
Right. So before that you were 10.
Yeah.
But you already knew what a period was when you were 10.
Yeah.
You knew when do you think you learned what periods were in your life?
I've kind of just known.
In what way?
Some girls just know.
Some girls just know.
Yeah.
So, like, when you were 3, you knew?
No.
Okay.
Well, maybe.
All right. But
Mom
like,
shares a lot of TMI.
Mom. So would you say that mom being open about this sort of just like has let you in on the fact that eventually you're going to be bleeding once a month? You're going to be bleeding out once a month.
I already
and
am,
not
Dad.
dying? I am aware. Is that something you want to share in the podcast with people that you've never met or seen before?
Sure, I don't care.
All right. You don't care.
Natural human being thing.
More power to you.
Thank you.
And by the way,
I deserve a lot more respect than I get. You know that.
This is true. But I will say, by the way, I wasn't going to be the one to bring it up because that's not my thing to bring up. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah.
So you are 11, right?
Yeah.
And you are now menstruating, right?
It was like a year ago.
Like a year ago. And would you say that has been, as far as being a human girl, right? Has that been difficult for you?
Yeah.
Been kind of a learning curve?
Yeah. It gets in the way of stuff.
Gets in the way. That's a good way to put it.
It gets in the way.
It does. I agree. Like, so
the blood is a wall of blocking stuff. You know that?
So give me some examples of what it gets in the way of. How has it impacted your life since you started having your period?
Well, at the very beginning, for like quite a few months, actually, probably, I couldn't swim while I was on my period.
All right.
Cramps really hurt.
Cramps hurt. Do you know what a cramp is when you have a period?
I don't know what a cramp is, but I know it hurts. I know Mom won't get me an electric blanket.
So a cramp is actually when your uterus is contracting to shed the lining from your uterus.
Okay.
That's what that is. It's like contracting to. It's part of menstruation. I had to look that up because when I found out that I was having a girl, I was like, I don't know how to raise a girl, and I don't really know anything about the female body, and so that's like one of those things. Like when I hear things about it, I'm like, oh, I got to remember this in case my kid ever has a question, or she could just Google it, which is kind of frightening to think that you could just Google a lot of this stuff.
You can Google everything.
God, you really can. So let me. So there are some Republicans, right? Or sorry, some politicians who think that you and I having this conversation would be considered grooming because you are a child and I'm an adult and we are talking about sex and menstruation.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: what do you think of this conversation?
Pretty all right.
Pretty all right. Is it kind of awkward?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I have to admit, being like growing up in a sheltered household, this is kind of a difficult conversation for me. Right? But I would say also, I'm really glad that we're doing it and I'm talking to you about it, even if it's really weird, like on a podcast. And I probably won't use any of this like for the actual episode, but I'm going to clip it out and edit it and stuff. Yeah. But what I'm getting at is if an adult male or female was talking to you about sex, would you know?
A stranger or someone else?
Aha! So there you go.
It depends on who.
It does, but let's go this route. If an adult that you knew, male or female, doesn't matter, was talking to you in this way, that the way that we're talking about sex, how would that make you feel?
Someone I don't know?
No, someone that you do know. Fine, but maybe weird. Like, why are we talking about this?
Kinda.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
Fair. All right. Now, if somebody you knew was talking to you about sex, but it wasn't like this, it was about like things they wanted to do, how would that make you feel? Uncomfortable, because that would be
them being a pedophile.
That is correct. Would you say that at the age of 11, you can tell the difference between a pedophile or someone who is trying to groom you and an adult who
is trying to educate
you? Can you tell the difference?
Oh, 100%.
So you're not an idiot?
No. I'm really good at telling the difference.
That's pretty good. Because there are politicians who believe that kids can't tell the difference between those things. And there are actually politicians who believe that adults can't tell the difference either. So
that's because they can't tell the difference.
That's because they can't tell the difference. And so do you have any idea what specifically I'm getting at here? It's probably way out there.
Dumb politics.
Dumb politics. What I'm actually talking about is there are a bunch of politicians who think that drag queens should not read there are a bunch of politicians who think that drag queens should not read kids' books to kids in public libraries.
Why specifically drag queens?
Because they think that drag queens are pedophiles, and that to be
why?
And they think that that a drag queen being in a school or a public library is equal to grooming.
If there was a drag queen in my school, I would want a picture.
Why?
And I would get my damn picture.
Why?
Because they're cool.
Why are drag queens cool?
Because they put on shiny, pretty stuff.
They put on shiny, pretty stuff. So I did a terrible job of explaining the significance of drag queens and drag shows. But I was wrong. I was like totally wrong. And I had to text my friend and get a good answer from him because I was thinking about it and I was like, okay, there's obviously more to it than that. And so then I realized like, well, I don't actually know a lot about it. So I texted him and I kind of wanted to read you his response. The purpose of drag shows is to be entertained with the illusion of female impersonation. That's where it came from. You impersonate females. So over time, that idea has actually changed. So, for example, in RuPaul's Drag Race, they now have drag competitions where they're like dressing into animal costumes. It's fantasy is a big part of it, but the main part is just entertainment. So the primary function of having a family-friendly drag show is to promote acceptance of the queer community in general. That's why they're significant. So the reason that I'm talking to you about politicians who say that is a form of grooming is because this is a very long-winded way of saying that those politicians who have those beliefs, they are the ones also that pushed for the rights for women to choose to have an abortion. They are the ones that pushed for Roe v. Wade to be overturned. So the same politicians who believe that drag queens that
are
pedophiles or that they groom children, they're the same ones who believe that women should not have the right to choose whether or not to have a baby. They are also...
Did you know that one of those politicians is actually a woman?
Yeah, actually a lot of them are.
Yeah.
And here's what's fun, though. Here's what's fun. Did you know a lot of the ones that are men, right, they know less about menstruation than you, an 11-year-old girl. Like they know astonishingly little about the female body.
They're the ones who say hold it in.
They're the ones who say hold it. They are also the ones who say that if you are raped, which is the forcible sex, a man and a woman, or a man on a child, or a woman on a child, or
non-binary superstar on a child.
Non-binary anybody on a non-binary anybody, forcible sex, that's rape, right? So there's actually a politician that said if it was a...
Not specifically just children. You said children.
Yeah, but I mean, you also have to specify there is rape of children and there's rape of adults, right? Because rape of a child is... I think that's just one of those things that is... I've told you about my father, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really don't know how to describe it. I have this very deep hatred for that. And you know what else also?
What?
I'll go off on a tangent real quick. When I hear politicians say that drag queens groom children, knowing full well that my father raped children, like, to hear, the reason they say that is because people are literally afraid of homosexuals and drag queens, and they really are afraid that their children will be raped and taken advantage of, but they have no idea who's doing it. And it's people like my father, who was like a totally, quote, normal person that you would never suspect of doing it. And he's now in prison, hopefully for the rest of his life. Like, that's where we are. And so for me, for politicians to say that, drag queens are grooming, it's particularly enraging because, like, dude, you know what? My father would have been one of those people that, like, went to a conservative or Republican fundraiser and, like, shook hands with all of them. And he was super conservative and racist and all the other bullshit that all the other Republican politicians are. So
I think they should change the word from homophobic because...
What do you think it should be?
Something else.
Okay. All right. So what I'm getting at, long-winded way, is these politicians who believe that, drag queens and homosexuals are pedophiles. They're responsible for, grooming and raping children. They're also the ones that pushed for abortion to be outlawed, for Roe v. Wade to be overturned. Yeah. They don't know a lot about the female body, women's bodies, girls' bodies. They don't know about menstruation. Some of the women who support it, I'm sure they're very smart and they do know how their bodies work.
And they probably haven't studied most of it, so they do know the basics of how their bodies work, but they haven't actually gone into detail looking about it.
But even then, some politicians are actually super smart, and it's when they talk in front of crowds that they sound really dumb. And the reason for that is they're really trying to pander to their audience, so they don't come across as being very smart. And also, like, think about it like this. If you wanted a lot of people to, if you wanted people to agree with you and to like you, and you already knew what they thought, you would just say things that they agree with, right? Probably. And so when you're a person...
If I wanted them to like me.
If you wanted them to like you. And if you're a person in power who has a lot of money from, being a politician or whatever, the consequences of, like, all the things that you believe in, you're kind of protected from, because you have money and power. And, if abortion is outlawed for everybody, well, guess what? If you have money and power,
that's not exactly...
You can just fly elsewhere, right?
Basically.
I personally think that the parents in this situation... 100% did the correct thing in taking her to another state. And at the same time, I don't think it was anybody else's decision other than those parents. Like, I think they had to make that decision for their child, because I think that's a very complicated decision to make that I don't think that a 10-year-old or 11-year-old can make on their own.
But at the same time, I would make the decision to go to a different state.
Yeah.
So, from what we're reading, we don't know if she said physically, I don't want this.
We don't.
We don't.
All we know are the facts of the case.
Yeah.
And so do you know what it's called when you quote someone? It's called hearsay. Okay. Even if someone, if I say to a lawyer, like, oh, I told my daughter this, even though that's coming from me, that's still hearsay. Yeah. So it's not direct evidence. It's not a fact. And so, but what we have here, we have the facts of this case. We have a 10-year-old girl who was raped by a 27-year-old man. And
27 years old and you're still stupid.
There is no age limit to stupidity.
Yeah.
So we know that...
But there's a certain line where you should not be too stupid to not know how to use a fork.
Nope. You'd be surprised. So what we do know is 10-year-old girl was raped by a 27-year-old man. We know that she lived in Ohio, and we know that her parents had to take her to Indiana for an abortion. Those are the facts. And to be honest with you, I don't really need to know what the girl said. I don't really need to know what the parents said. I don't really need to know what the doctor said or anything. The way that I view it, this 10-year-old girl should not be pregnant.
No, she should not be.
And she should not have had to go to another state to not be pregnant, to get an abortion. She should have been able to do that in her hometown, because being raped is, again, a trauma that is too much for anybody.
Years, probably the rest of your life in therapy for that.
Yeah, exactly. And
if you don't get therapy, then you're just, it might just not get better.
And
don't know if it'll get better or worse. I can't tell you, but it's probably not going to get as much bettered as it could with a therapist.
And another thing too is there have been more politicians, and even like people like on Twitter, talking heads, like not like journalists or fake journalists or whatever, who have put like other opinions on this other than like the facts, right?
Yeah.
One example is some politicians now have turned this into a race and immigration issue, because the 27-year-old, well, they're now, so what people are saying is the 27-year-old, whose name was Gerson Fuentes. They're saying, some people are saying that he is in the country illegally, which may or may not be true. And so they have now turned this into an immigration thing. If we were more...
fuck people.
They're now saying that if our immigration policies were better, this 10-year-old girl would never have been raped and we wouldn't be in this position. So instead of now talking about abortion and the fact that this 10-year-old girl was raped, now
immigration has nothing to do with that.
Oh my God. Immigration has nothing to do with this because as I can attest,
your race doesn't define what you do.
Not only that, but there are, I'm sure, plenty of cases of non-immigrant child rape in the United States.
Yeah.
That we're simply not hearing about. So yeah, immigration has nothing to do with this, but it doesn't like,
your race doesn't affect your thought process. From where you're from, it might.
Like how you're raised?
Yeah. And it probably will. It most definitely will. But like,
that has nothing to do with the color of your skin.
Yeah.
Like most conversations with kids and friends, there is no monumental conclusion to any discussion. There is a pause, a break in the dialogue to be returned to. I spoke with my daughter for over 2 hours and we covered a lot of ground. Some of it she didn't want to share, some of it I didn't want to share. But all of it stemmed from the singular topic of a 10-year-old girl being forced to give birth, or rather, escaping forced birth by crossing state lines. The general consensus between my daughter and I is that the logic behind forcing anyone to give birth is simply poor and unfounded. There is no grand belief, religious or ethical, that reconciles the repulsive nature of conservative ideology when it comes to restricting access to abortion. The modern conservative movement does not give a shit about you or your children. Rather than face the reality of their policies, rather than engage honestly on these topics, they double down on the worst of their policies and beliefs and use that roadblock as a soapbox to drum up support from voters who will inevitably find themselves on the receiving end of the policies that they help promote. You can expect to see regular reporting in the mainstream media of all the exceptions to abortion bans that simply don't make the cut. And I have the confidence to predict to you that you will hear the mental and logical gymnastics from conservatives to explain why an exception isn't really an exception. That's the thing about topics like abortion. They are not black and white. Putting blanket bans in place puts the focus squarely on cases that fall in the gray area. And the gray area is where nuance and science and ethics are so critical. Conservative logic doesn't operate in the gray area. It is manufactured to be as ignorant and cruel as possible, because as long as power and money allow for loopholes, you can be sure they will be happy to grant themselves exceptions while subjecting you to their cruelty. It's been nearly a month since I had this discussion with my daughter, and with a lot of reflection, I think I do have a somewhat tidy closer for this episode. My daughter is your average American 11-year-old, and I hope this episode gives you an idea of how children actually think about complex and mature topics. My daughter, at times introverted, soft-spoken, or unsure how to answer, can indeed grasp the concept of forced birth, how it is scary, how it is cruel, how it is not in the interest of children just like her. To even put forth the idea that a 10-year-old giving birth is an opportunity for good things is abusive. The Conservative Party that puts so much effort into protecting children from illegal immigrants and drag queens happily promotes the idea of rape and forced birth as part of God's plan. There is no world where a rational adult should hear that message and adopt it as their own. I'm not telling you how to parent, but I do encourage you to have frank discussions with your kids about how the world works. The alternative is them slipping around in the cat diarrhea of political charlatans, pundits, and talking heads. This has been Unfuck the Poor.